It's great to have your company. You're listening to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity. My name's Simon Smart.
And I'm John Dixon.
Now, there was a time when belief in God was just assumed. Arguments for God's existence were about confirming what everyone knew to be true. But in the post-Christian West, where there seems to be more faith in technology and science than anything spiritual, belief in God is a much more complex thing. Well, Michael Jensen, who was until recently a theological lecturer and has now taken up the post as parish minister, is an author of several books, including his latest book, which is called My God, Is It Possible to Believe Anymore? Michael's in the studio. Great to have you in, Mike.
Oh, thanks for having me, Simon.
Now, it's a challenging thing to write about belief in God these days. In some circles, that's sort of lunatic fringe stuff. But I get the impression that this is a book that's been brewing for you for a long time. Is this something you felt you had to do?
It has been brewing for quite some years. In fact, I think I started conversations with people in 2008 and 2009. I mean, my business as a theological lecturer and as a parish minister is to talk to people about believing. And lots of people do believe. Lots of people have belief in God, but holding on to belief in God is not always easy. In the modern world, so many things seem to counter it. There's so many challenges. Even in the theological college, our students would go through periods of not feeling like they believed very much at all.
Our new atheist friends would say it's believing things in the absence of evidence. That's what faith is. How would you come at a definition?
If reason is our right hand, then faith is our left hand, or belief is our left hand. When it comes to grasping the world, we take things on trust. That doesn't mean that's irrational or that is unthinking. But we do that kind of thing all the time. We don't know everything, and so we have to do what we can to trust those who do know, and we do that all the time. It seems to me perfectly normal and ordinary, and so that's part of what belief in God is. It's a component of belief in God. I don't see that there's much contradiction with that sort of very ordinary activity.
A lot of what you write about in the book analyses where we are as a post-Christian society. What are some of the major themes that influence the way we think today?
Of course, it's the prominence of the so-called scientific paradigm, which it as a kind of thought experiment, the way it works is it said we're not going to accept as an explanation for things, a metaphysical explanation. By doing that, it kind of seeks to explain the physical world. But what's happened is that's not become then simply a thought experiment, that's become an entire way of life. That's become then assumed. And so that's one of the conditions under which believing has taken place. What's been forgotten there is that actually the reason that we had that sort of scientific revolution, that ability to analyse the world, actually has theological reasons in the first place. But going back to the 16th century is an interesting history.
How have theological ideas promoted even that scientific approach?
The Reformation, in particular in the 16th century, in that period, the shift was from a view which said that everything, there's a kind of a God or a spirit under every sort of part of the universe, to a move which said the way in which you understand God, the way in which you receive and contact or make a relationship with God is through His Word in the Bible and through the message of Jesus in the cross. And that meant that the world itself then was free. We were liberated in one sense to look at the world, look at the physical world as the creation of God, not as kind of just shot through with kind of magic stuff. So it's the world that's created by a reasonable God. And in going out to analyse the world, of course, we make the big assumption that what we're going to find is coherent at some level. There's a kind of wager, what I would call a wager for coherence, that we do when we go to analyse the world, which God is a great explanation for, and it gives us a bedrock for what becomes the scientific method. What's happened is we've forgotten that bedrock because we can see science it works at one level. It gets us great traction in the world. We can build aeroplanes and nuclear missiles and trains and things. We see we can kind of get on with, we can get on about our daily life, but that doesn't mean that that's the full explanation of things.
You clearly believe that the question of God and faith remains an important one for people, even though we might suppress it in some senses. Now, what gives you that idea? You say that there's theological thinking everywhere.
At every turn, we're making decisions about who or what is behind the world, what the world is, what the universe, how it was made or how it wasn't. So to say that there isn't a God is actually a theological commitment. It's actually a theological statement. It's saying, as much as any claim a Christian might make, it's a theological claim. And if you've made that theological claim, you can then try and build a worldview out of that theological claim. But you shouldn't pretend that it isn't a theological claim. So I'd say...
a whole lot of implications that spring from that as well, aren't there?
There's a whole lot of implications being that that we should just we should actually admit that and then have a fair discussion about what's a better theological claim. I think that's what I'm trying to do in one sense, is say let's have a level playing field here and not pretend that we don't have theologies all over the place. It's very interesting to me to see the way various atheist thinkers replace God with counter theologies, especially of things like national myths. So one popular atheist is, of course, Peter Fitzsimmons. His whole career is about building a myth of Australianness as a kind of counter theology to a Christian theology. And so he writes biographies of great Australian heroes and what have you, and constructs this sort of myth of a kind of ethic of Australianness, conveniently excluding, of course, the place of Christianity in Australian history, I note. But to say that he has no God or no metaphysical claims, he's making very, very strong metaphysical or mythical claims all the time.
This touches on something I was really interested in the book. The motivations for belief, that belief is not simply a mental process. We look at the evidence and we suddenly believe. You drill down and say there are aesthetic elements, psychological elements, emotional elements. Can you tease that out for us?
We forget often that we're whole people. Partly it's because we spend some time on the internet where we act a bit like brains in jars, and because we have this myth of the human person as a brain in a brain and precious little else. And we forget, in fact, that our brains are part of our bodies. Brains are pieces of flesh, and affected by emotions, affected by our moral sense, and all of those kind of things. As whole human beings, we operate in the world, and we're influenced in a variety of senses, in a variety of different ways. So when it comes to thinking about matters of religious belief, considering something like Christianity, we're not just dealing with mathematical equations here. We're dealing with an existential issue as well. We're dealing with something that concerns you personally. We're dealing with what is good and what is true. A lot of people find it hard to say that they don't believe in God or even in the whole of the Christian message, but they find it hard to believe it's for them. So that's a very interesting difference, isn't it? They believe it's true, or couldn't counter it, but they're not sure that it really fits with them personally. Often there are people who've had an experience of church. I want to invite people like that to have a bit of a rethink, reconsider of that, because often the reasons they have, these personal reasons for thinking that it isn't for them, are misplaced, I think. They're deeply misplaced. Often they believe Christianity is something about being morally pure, and of course it's not at all. It's about acknowledging and healing your brokenness.
You mentioned technological progress, our mastery, at least to some degree, over the natural world. But you also make the point that no matter how well we seem to do in that regard, our existence is imperfect and death remains the sort of shadow over that. This is one of the reasons why this question remains important for everyone, isn't it?
I think that's true. I think, as I've said, there's theology and belief everywhere. And one of our beliefs is our belief in our mastery in our technology, our belief that we will live in a shiny, perfect, sort of Formica world with no stains, with complete air conditioning, which is sort of the kind of 21st century heaven in a way, that we will live in this kind of perfect, sublime, cul-de-sac, suburban heaven eternally if we can just get our technology right. Of course, this is blind to what the world is really like, that we really have to deal with and encounter and grasp the fact of our own mortality. Now, I have to say, some religions are very good at trying to shield us from our mortality. They try and pretend that our mortality is not there, our physical decline. But I think this is where actually a good look at the Christian message really helps, because Christianity doesn't shield us from death. It's not about a belief that somehow death is completely denied. It's a belief in what happens through the other side of death. The question of suffering is, of course, the famous counterclaim to the existence of God. The funny thing about the Bible is it throws you right into the middle of the world where people are trying to wrestle with the question of death, the question of suffering. The people in Mark's Gospel, for instance, are beset by fear of death. They're kind of death is crowding in on them. So we shouldn't imagine that the world of the Bible is remote from that fear at all. Neither does it provide us some kind of lollipop, fairy floss solution to it, but stares death in the face. I think that's one of the most persuasive and, I don't want to say delightful, but persuasive, convincing, compelling things about Christian faith.
Bravely, you write a chapter on the devil, and you tell us that the devil has a half-truth for us, and it's a deadly half-truth, that we're sinners.
It's true, but if that's all we heard from him, I mean, his name is the accuser. Of course, one of the things I want to say is that the cartoon image of the devil is kind of misses the point.
Did you think twice about having a chapter on the devil in this otherwise highly sophisticated book?
I did think twice, but I thought this is cheeky enough perhaps to be interesting.
You turn over the page and you go, what is Michael doing? And then you get into it and you think, oh, I see what he's doing.
Well, partly because I think one of the problems with believing is not just simply a rational issue, but the issue of whether I believe my sins can be forgiven, whether I believe that really I am mendable, whether I'm redeemable. I don't think people always believe that that's the case, and that is the devil's job in Scripture. He's the character who accuses, and his half truth is to say that you are a sinner, which is true, but the negative in it is that you're beyond salvation, you're beyond redemption. In fact, of course, the gospel is a powerful statement that the devil's half-truth is only that.
Francis Spufford summarises his book in The Christian Message by saying, far more can be mended than you know. I thought that was a lovely kind of phrase.
Yeah, that's a brilliant line. I mean, the grace of God, it kind of passes all understanding, as his peace does. And that's something I'd like to invite people to experience, to kind of just look, you have no idea what God can do, in fact. I think Spufford also talks about belief in God like falling in love. I think there's something right there. You can't, in one sense, know it unless you kind of plunge right in. And then you'll see perhaps what's in store for you personally in this.
Yeah, Michael, the last chapter of the book argues that understanding Christianity is like getting a joke. The gospel of Jesus, you say, is comic. It's a really nice last chapter, I have to say. But what did you mean when you said it's comic?
Well, not just that it's got a happy ending, but that it's a surprise and it makes surprising sense. The way a joke works is you get two disparate... I love puns, so maybe this is my bad dad joke analysis of how jokes work, but you get two seemingly disconnected things and you put them together and behold, they make sense. And you didn't see it beforehand, but now when you see it connected, it makes sense of everything. In fact, jokes can change the world like that. They're really very powerful things. As Freud said, actually, he wrote this book, Jokes on the Unconscious. He was really kind of into the analysis of jokes, which isn't very funny, actually, as it turns out. But the gospel is like this. I think the gospel of Jesus does this. In one sense, it doesn't make sense. You kind of look around at the world and it is what it is. The presence of someone like Jesus in it doesn't seem very expected. And yet the fact that grace in him appears, that in fact there is a yes to humankind despite all the rubbish, all the crap that we are like, all the mess that we make, is the surprising truth. That's the surprising reality. And once you see that, nothing can be the same.
Well, the book is My God, is it possible to believe anymore? It's a really challenging book. I think it'll have a lot to say to lots of people. It's a great gift to people. Thanks so much for coming and talking about it, Mike.
Oh, thanks for having me, Simon.